One, two, one, two. Welcome to another episode of Sneaks Rhymes in Life. I'm your host, Lionel McDonald. So, 2023, told you it was coming to an end. Y'all see it on the calendar. But I'm a man that loves to finish what he starts. So I started a series at the end of the year, and I was going one a month, trying to give you my 12 favorite albums 2023. I called it 23 till infinity. 12 of my favorite cuts from, and I will tell you that I started strong, felt good about it. I had to work through some issues in terms of losing my voice almost as I was recording that the Black Moon episode when I was in New York, but had to pause for various reasons. But I am back. So what I'm going to do today, we still have 5 more episodes, but we're going to talk about the 5 remaining albums. The list was already made a while ago. Probably about 3 episodes in, I had made the list for the year, and I was going to go month by month. So I'll touch on I will touch on the 5 remaining albums, and then of those, I will give you my top 5. So of my favorites from them, not the best. Everyone's entitled to opinion. This is why I have a podcast so I can speak my mind. But so I will touch on the 5 remaining albums from 2023. So we'll start with the first one. This would have been the episode that would have come out in August. So I have chosen Lords of the Underground. Here Come the Lords. So definitely an impactful album for me. Funky Child is one of the best songs that has ever come out in that particular year. So we think about the group, we have Do It All, we have Mr. Funky, and DJ Lord Jazz, all from New York, New Jersey. Again, Funky Child was the big song. They all met at like Shaw University, early 90s. And then a friend of theirs actually introduced them into the legendary Marley Marl. We'll have to get into Marley Marl and the best producers that ever been out there. I'm going to look for an article that I can draft off and then kind of talk about it and then give you mine. But met Marley Marl. They ultimately got into the studio and started to work on things. Fun fact is that Redman actually was Do It All's DJ in the early 90s. I want to say 91 and even maybe 92. But ultimately, the album is curated. Here Come the Lords is an absolute smash. And I think if I look at the track list that I have listed here, Here Come the Lords is definitely one of my favorite albums from that era. So if we think about the first song that came out was the one that many have heard. Here Come the Lords is the opening track on the album. From the Bricks, Funky Child is the standout cut. It was like, I want to say top 15 on Billboard in '93. Actually, Lords of the Underground, and we'll get to the other groups that came out, and we've already talked about Soldier Mischief, Far Side, many others, including Wu-Tang and Tribe Called Quest. Lords of the Underground was the artist of the year according to, or the group of the year according to BET. But the funny thing with the album is, keeping it underground. Gravedigger, check it. The remix is another dope one. But what's unique about this album, Psycho is a crazy dope song, and it's just the production that gets me, along with then obviously Funky Child. But then the song that stands out and has stood this test of time 30 years later is none other than Chief Rocket. So although people talk about Funky Child, Chief Rocket is truly the cut from the album. But the unique thing, and I wouldn't say they were a one and done, but that was like the peak of their success overall, because then they came out with Keepers of the Funk in '94. You know, there was even like some controversy. They had a track that they did called Burn Rubber, that actually ended up on the New Jersey Drive soundtrack. But, you know, people were, you know, taking it the wrong way and say, oh, you're promoting carjacking. But they were promoting reality that happens in New Jersey. Third album, Resurrection, was on Queen Latifah's label. And then not much happened with the group ever since. Details are very sketchy. Obviously, that what happened to Mr. Funky and Lord Jazz, where did he go? But Do All of the group is the one that kind of really was able to parlay his rap career into something else. And one of the big things he became was an actor. So he was on Sopranos, he was on 30 Rock, he was on I want to say he was also on Law and Order even. We already know that you know, Ice-T made that transition as well. But he's been on those shows. But I think what even more unique than that was his political campaign. So we had Do It All. He ran for councilman in his home ward in 2017. He didn't win. He did come back in 2020 and actually did win. So I think currently he's still the councilman in Newark, New Jersey, which is pretty amazing. Not many people, you know, think that rappers can be anything successful, but I think many, from businessmen to politicians, you know, we've even had Killer Mike, you know, in Atlanta make his mark. So that is Lords of the Underground, a smash success, one of the fresh smelling albums, you know, that we had. And there was lots of controversy that were they stealing someone's style, Fushnikins and them kind of in my eyes, or you could hear some subliminal things. Didn't see eye to eye because I think there was style or along with DOS effects, like there was some similarities and who was taking from who, I think to be determined. But Lords of the Underground, that is not album number one. Album number two, I'm going to go, and this would have been the September joint, I'm going to go with Reaching from Diggable Planets, a new representation of time and space. So this one came out February 9th. And what's actually, if I go back a second, I think what's unique also about Lords of the Underground, it came out on January 1st. It was like the first album that came out that year. But February 9th on Elektra Records, the trio Doodlebug, Ladybug, and Butterfly, they came out with their debut album, Diggable Planet. And truly, it sounded not like no other. Yes, we had sprinkles of Jazzmatazz and obviously Branford Marsalis was dabbling into the Jazzmatazz done by Guru. You know, Gangstar definitely had an influence. Tribe Called Quest was already doing their thing with Low End Theory that had come out 2 years prior. So there was just definitely a jazz theme that was out in hip hop. But I believe Diggable Planets did it their own way. You know, such a smooth trio of MCs. Ladybug doesn't get enough credit in terms of how great. You know, they were recently in Toronto. I missed the show, but I heard the show was fire. And again, Diggable Planets made one of these unique albums. And I think this is where hip hop really branched off in so many different ways. We had the hardcore, the West became on a greater resurgence, as I already mentioned, Snoop Dogg in one of the episodes. But then we had we had another West Coast resurgence and a different spin with Farside and Souls of Mischief on the heels of already what we had seen with like King T, which didn't really sound like some of the traditional G-Funk stuff that we've heard previously. The rhyme scheme and rapping was much different than what we would have heard from even the NWA days. But singles that they had, Cool Like That is the smash hit. Everyone remembers it. I think that was one of the best singles of 93. Second one was Where I'm From, another laid back, really paying homage to their homeland and home city of Brooklyn, New York. And then obviously Nickelbag, was the third single. So they did have another album that they came out, but not much really came out from Diggable Planets beyond that. They did Blowout Comb. That was the second album. They did some funky stuff, and they got definitely, you could see the connection they had with Gangstar, because Guru was on, and I think Primo did a track. So very unique of what they did. Blowout Comb is a little bit more political in terms of they want to talk about. They talk, whether it's Black Panthers or standing up for Black rights or things that are happening in the world. They definitely go that route. Less political, but there's a couple touches. They talk about obviously the music scene and particularly jazz musicians and how much drug abuse that there is on one track. And there's even a track, and I can look it up here, that really talks about essentially abortion and what the world looks like from that lens. So really think about Diggable Planets as, again, putting out an amazing record in 2023. 30 years later, we flip back and look at Diggable Planets and what they were able to do in 1993. So we're doing 30 years of celebration of one of the great years, and may have to do it again in 94, because 94 is almost as good, if not better. I personally prefer 93. Some will say 94, and as you all probably know, Illmatic came out in 94. I think it's the 19th of April, and arguably that is the best album, my favorite album personally. So I did some flipping. Originally when I made this list, Snoop Dogg was going to be October, but I moved Snoop Dogg to July when he was doing his concert. So this is probably the toughest choice for me that I had to make. And I flipped and flopped back and forth of who should get this spot. Because I think there's about 5 other albums that I did not choose that could have got this spot. But I chose one specifically to take this spot. And I would not say by any stretch of the imagination that I was his biggest fan today, back then, anywhere in between. But I think what he was able to accomplish, and I think me seeing him visually, but also hearing him as an MC in a different way that I didn't hear other MCs. Tupac gets the October spot, and Strictly for My Niggas is the album that he had out. So this is his second studio album. When I look at tracks, he definitely had many political and social views that he had on that album. He definitely went more of an underground or indie rap sound. That's how it sounds. So it didn't sound like a West Coast album. It also didn't sound like an East Coast album. Now, there's obviously other areas that have really exploded: Atlanta, Detroit, Houston, New Orleans over time, but it didn't sound like any of those albums. So I think when we look at the album in its entirety, and I think when I say I saw Tupac visually, the movie a couple years prior, Juice, really kind of got me engaged into his mannerisms and what he was like as a person and how he acted, which I thought was totally dope. Then I saw him in a wholly different role in Above the Rim. And the first song on it, Holler If You Hear Me, is on the Above the Rim soundtrack. This is why Tupac has now worked into, and I'd say, like, I'm not the biggest Tupac fan, but I would tell you, as we go through the track list, this album has some of my favorite Tupac songs on it. Now, my favorite Tupac song is with Snoop Dogg. It is, other than two of America's Most Wanted. But when we talk about Holler If You Hear Me, Keep Your Head Up, and where is the song here? I definitely like Guess Who's Back. So that is why that I've chosen this song to be, or this album to be on this album. But I think the second best song after To America's Most Wanted is on this album. And this is what really cements this album for me. It's the collaboration with his mentor, and he used to be a backup dancer. Digital Underground is I Get Around. I Get Around is such a fire song. And I truly admired the flow, the technique, how it sounds sonically. It standed the test of time. And I think, there were some guest shots on it. Cube is on the album, but Keep Your Head Up was obviously a very positive song. So it really showed Tupac's ability to go in multiple different ways. And when I kind of did my research, I was kind of weighing a few albums, to know that Tupac co-produced literally the entire album was the cementing piece for me. I think Papa's song was the fourth single. That one didn't resonate with me. That also came out in 94, even on a 93 album. But I think that lineup of those first three singles, Holler If You Hear Me, I Get Around, and Keep Your Head Up, that is why this album ended up on the list. I think it had tons of critical acclaim. It was number 4 on the U.S. R&B and Rap 100. It peaked or debuted at on the U.S. Billboard 200 at number 24. When you look at ratings, it's 3.5 or 4 out of 4. You look at the Rolling Stones album night, it's a 5 out of 5. So the source gave it 3.5. I think that was too low. It doesn't get the credit. Now, I think when you start comparing Tupac albums that are down the road, there are other ones that All Eyes on Me is kind of the one that really stands out, that it's probably not as good as that, but for the test of time that it sticks out for me, this album 100% belongs on this list. I will talk about some of the other ones that didn't make the list, but Strictly for My Niggas is definitely an album that is on this top 12 favorite album. And because of the singles, this is why this album stuck. There are some other albums that had a great song, maybe better than one of the, but it had 3 fire singles before we got to one that didn't really resonate with me, Papa's song. And hey, maybe I'll listen to it in the car. Maybe it will grow on me again, and maybe I'll remember that I did kind of like the song. But Strictly for My Niggas is definitely a song that belongs on here. So then we go to the final 2. So we're only down to 2 albums left. And the reason I saved these 2, because these 2 are the best 2 albums. Uniquely, these 2 albums are married because they released on, I will tell you, the greatest day of hip hop release, which is November 9th, 1993. I still remember I was in college at the University of Windsor, and I went to, I want to say it was Sam the Record Man, Devonshire Mall, and I only had money for one album. There's 2 albums that I considered buying, and a friend of mine told me about it. And the first one that I'm going to tell you about is the one that I bought. And that was because I knew it was going to be a sure thing. And that is Tribe Called Quest's 3rd album, Midnight Marauders. So when we look at revisiting that album, this album had elevated and felt totally different. Sonically, it felt differently than its predecessors, particularly Low End Theory, which had a very jazzy, now this had a jazzy feel, but definitely soulful. And I think when you see some of the pieces on Q-Tip as a producer and as a person, and that he was a perfectionist for this album, he had contributions obviously from a Large Pro. Alicia He Muhammad was on it. It definitely had, the bass for this album is different than any other Tribe album, but it's the drums that make this album so unique. So when we talk about this album, there was some critical acclaim with this one. It was recognized as one of the best albums of 93. It was on Jive Records. This album, I think in the first calendar year or 2 years, it did. Well, first year it went gold, second year it went platinum. But this may be the apex of what most people think of Tribe Called Quest, and that this was the best album. So, we already had gone through People's Instinctive Travels and Pass the Rim and Low End Theory. Those are the first two. Think People's Instinctive got like 4 or 4.5 mics. Tribe Called Quest, second album, the Low End Theory, got 5 mics. This was also a 5 mic album. So this album was recorded, kind of almost in the same realm when Q-Tip was really thinking and working with Nas on One Love. And he definitely made a smash with that. I also think this is an opportunity where we really saw, I think in the onset, the group was kind of led by Q-Tip. In the second album, the Low End Theory, you really saw on Butter, and you really felt the impact of you felt the impact of Phife Dawg. But I think when you start to listen to Midnight Marauders and you hear A Million Stories and him on a war tour, and you hear him on Oh My God, and you hear just on some of these other songs, you really feel that Q-Tip is now, as an MC, or sorry, Phife is Q-Tip's equal, not like his sidecar or his hype man. Phife is his own MC and definitely took leaps and bounds. And that's what the special thing about Midnight Marauders is that they were partners. They were truly partners, truly equals. And hey, we kind of had a taste of this on Check the Rhyme back on the Low End Theory. When you hear them on a war tour, when you hear them on and multiple other songs, I think Phife stands out like no other song on Electric Relaxation. And in many people's eyes, that is their favorite song. When you talk about Tribe Called Quest, I think the elevation of just lyricism, metaphors, diction, cadence, flows, all that changed, and how they had ever sounded before. And I think that's what the unique thing about this album. It became a 5-minute album. It is the gold standard of albums in 1993. In my opinion, it's the best album that came out that year. The other album that I will talk is probably a more impactful album, and I will definitely give it because it changed New York hip hop forever. So you talk about the cover art, which was also so unique, and I have it up in my house. And if you think of who was on there, from Beastie Boys to Busta Rhymes to Black Moon to Jazzy Jeff to Heavy D to Grandmaster Flash, Organized Confusion, Far Side, like there's so many faces that are on this, so much, and that's what that line stands out for me. Shout out to all those that made the album cover. It is absolutely meant. MC Light's on there, Lords of the Underground, like the list goes on. Kid Capri, Jungle Brothers is part of the Native Tongue family. So the album was received immediately as a rap classic. The Source gave it 5 mics. Now, Rolling Stone totally messed this one up and only gave it like 5 mics, which is unbelievable. But this, in retrospect, the artistic piece with the lyricism, and I would tell you, of all Tribe Called Quest albums, this is the best produced album because of the sonic and how it sounds. My favorite song on the album is Lyrics to Go. There are other songs. A War Tour is the one that stands out. That was the main single that came out over time. So many people love this album. I think Electric Relaxation was the second single, and which one was it? Oh My God, with Busta Rhymes. And I remember the B side of that. I remember getting it at HMV 333 Yonge Street, downtown Toronto. So in a yellow cassette tape sleeve. 1-2 Shit is the B side with Busta Rhymes. That didn't end up in until Tribe Called Quest released B sides and rarities on a whole nother album multiple years later. But yeah, this is the one that really stood the test of time. U.S. Billboard eventually became the #1 album, and this is despite the next group that I will tell you about being out there. So truly a groundbreaking album. I still prefer Low End Theory, but when I talk about my top 5 albums, this album is in the top 5, along with Low End Theory. So this is an absolute certified classic when we talk about albums. And you just look at the list. Just look at the list and how you just think, wow, all of this was on the same album. And that's what makes Midnight Marauders such an amazing album, and one that will always stand the test of time. So it's cool, like the way that the album flows. It is like you have to listen to the beginning to end. You start with the tour guide, you move through with Steve Biko, and they're stirred up, and Fife sounds amazing on that. Then you have Award Tour, 8 Million Stories by Fife, Suck It Nigga. Obviously, you have by Q-Tip, and that's kind of his soliloquy. He always has one of those tracks on there, but he's got that one, and then Midnight back to back, and then Can We Get Down? I would say maybe if we're saying one of the weaker tracks, but it fits in where we go from there to Elite Electric Relaxation, and then we get loose, because then we got Clap Your Hands, Oh My God, Keep It Rolling with Large Professor. The Chase Part 2 is a great fit, and then we hit my stride, and this is when the energy is like at 11 lyrics to go, and then God Lives Fruit. So an absolute classic when we talk about hip hop albums. But I really tried to hold out and leave this one for last, but this is the game changer. So I'll tell you the story. And I said already, I gave you the first part, that I had 2 albums in my hand. One I had heard about was going to be good, and one I knew was going to be good. So I took the sure thing. I went home a month later. I was going to Jamaica. Friend of mine dubbed me a cassette, because this is the cassette era. There is barely anyone with any CDs in 93. And they told me, hey, I dubbed you this. Take this, listen to this on your trip to Jamaica. You're gone to Jamaica for 2 weeks for holidays. So I remember listening to my grandmother's living room. I revisited that room like 3 years ago when my dad passed away. But I listened to this album. I listened, I fast forward, and I listened. I just could not get into it. I would actually honestly tell you that I didn't like it. And for those that know me, I now absolutely love and am infatuated with the Wu-Tang Clan and 36 Chambers. That is the gold standard of, when you think of albums. My daughter, my wife tease me because sometimes they say to get my attention is Wu-Tang, and I'm like perk up and say, what? Anyways, I could not live or listen to hip hop without Wu-Tang being a part of it. I judge some people whether they are a fan or not of the Wu-Tang Clan. With 9 members, and it's how it's intricately, it matches that 9 members, and you have 4 chambers of your heart. So there's the 36 chamber. It's also tied to a Kung Flu movie. So there's lots to that. When you think of the RZA, the Jizza, Inspector Deck, Ghostface, You Got the Chef, and then I think of the first song that I ever heard, which was Method Man. And I thought it was catchy. I didn't really listen to it. I wasn't in a good space to listen to the album. So after listening to this at my grandma's, I put it down. Probably put it down for multiple days. I went back and listened to this album. And it was kind of like in a different spot of the tape. I flipped it, and I would tell you that I ended up listening to like the end, when I only listened to about 4 songs on the front side. And I will tell you, I got to the song Protect Your Neck, and I was so confused because there were so many guys on the song. But my gateway into Wu-Tang for the rest of my life is because of what I heard when I heard Jiz's verse at the end of Protect Your Neck. Unbelievable. I was absolutely blown away. I never heard anything like it. Then I was like, I got to hear more of this guy. This guy, the genius. He is a genius. He's the Jizza. But they also called him the genius. And then it started to click. They have nicknames. So then I started to listen to additional songs. I think I listened to Tears and then 36 Chamber or 7 Chamber. And then I went back or listened to Tears because that's the end of the album. But then I went back and said, how many more songs is this Jizza guy on? And then I kind of didn't go far enough. And I thought it would catch him on a different song. And then I end up hearing, I actually was looking for Shame on a Nigga. I passed it on the tape. And then I ultimately hit Clan on the Front, which is also a song that Jizz is in. And I went, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I was going crazy about this album. And then the rest is history. Mystery of the Chess Boxing, Wu-Tang Ain't Nothing to Fuck With. Cream hit me like a ton of bricks. It is an anthem of New York to this day. I went back and I finally caught this Method Man song. It's like, yo, this Method Man guy is crazy nice. But then I started to listen to it as I kept listening more and more. The guy that stuck out for me, and I got a shirt on, is the two guys that are on this shirt, Ray and Ghost. Ray is my number one. Probably would say Ghostface is like my number two, followed by Meth and then Jizza, and then there's the other guys. But Ray and Ghost, it's funny that how a couple years later we got Only Built for Cuban Links, and Ghostface is like the guest star. It's like a movie. Then we got Iron Man and Raekwon is on it lots. These guys were inseparable. Arguably, if they decided to just do album, they'd be recognized as one of the greatest duos ever. But when we think about hip hop and from 73 to 93, it's only, if you can believe, 20 years. But when we look at hip hop, things that started to go together, cultures started to collide. So you think about sneakers in hip hop, and then how breakdancing was part of hip hop, and then and ultimately now stands as one of the elements. Then you have graffiti as part of it, emceeing and DJing. DJing is the core, the original element. But then there was an influence of what people in New York and people that listen to hip hop. Kung Fu movies was definitely a part of it. And RZA was definitely influenced by Kung Fu flicks. He's related to both Jizza and also Old Dirty Bastard. They grew up in Brooklyn. They influenced by, Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon, the 36th chamber of Shaolin, and it became a whole thing. Staten Island was Shaolin, and the mastermind was RZA. He had all of these beats that he was working on, and they just needed then MCs, and he had kind of picked out MCs, and these guys didn't know each other. Like even like the story of Ray and Ghost were like in different cliques and were actually enemies, but at one point they thought they were going to actually fight each other in the studio very early on, but they learned to accept. They learned others were nice on the mic. RZA really had sold them the dream and that this could really go somewhere, because hip hop really needed a super group, as we call Wu-Tang. Ultimately, all of these guys in the chamber, and I think the guy that never gets mentioned nearly enough when we talk about the best MC of Wu-Tang is Inspectah Deck. Inspectah Deck has the best Wu-Tang verse we've ever heard, and that is from Triumph. Literally, he shut the album down, shut down a double album as soon as he spoke on the opening single. That's why they released that song first. But he helped raise the bar, and guys continued to work on their craft, and ultimately we got 36 Chambers. So when we think about, Mr. Diggs, otherwise known as the RZA, he is the mastermind of what this is. Him and Fourth Discipline are those that work together to connect and ultimately to craft the production that became 36 Chambers. Dennis Cole, otherwise known as Ghostface. And it's funny that you look at that album, you didn't see Ghostface's face for like almost 2 years. It was really almost until you really could see him on a regular basis, because he played this moniker of never being able to see his face. I think because of potentially a criminal record or those that were trying to get at him, he didn't want anyone to see who he looked like. But he became part of it and connected with these guys, and ultimately they really worked together to essentially assemble like the Avengers. And I think that's a great way to summarize and connect with them. They all brought something different. You know, hip hop was in a world of the West Coast G-Funk, East Coast hardcore hip hop, jazz rap, as I mentioned, with Diggable Planets and Jazzmatazz and many of the other pieces. But we went to a whole nother area with Wu-Tang, and truly amazing. The sound still exists in hip hop today with how Wu-Tang. I've seen Wu-Tang probably 6 or 7 times, twice in the last 2 years in concert, and absolutely incredible the energy they feed off one another and come together. But when we think about New York and we think about the impact out of this firehouse studio that they created in Brooklyn, you know, the first session, actually, I'm reading here on an article, it only cost $300. They had to work so hard to create and to RZA, that's why he's the mastermind, was able to fit and figure ways for Masakilla to be part of a song. And then, you know, You God would come with a different perspective and how it all kind of fit together to ultimately become the record we know today. The first song, again, Protect Your Neck, came out in late 92. I never heard it. I heard Method Man first, and then I heard Protect Your Neck. But it wasn't until I heard Jizz on Protect Your Neck that I really was a fan, and ultimately a lifelong fan of this song. You know, Cream is still one of those amazing cuts, and you think of the chemistry that you know, Deck and Raekwon have on the song. Like, you could feel like in some ways they could have been their own duo. I think every single MC has their own standout moment. You know, You God on Mystery Chess Boxing. Cream is Raekwon. I think if you think of geez, let me just think of, oh, I said Jizza was standing moment was on Protect Your Neck. If you think of Bring the Ruckus, I think you think of Ghostface. I think also Old Dirty Bastard's best verse is also on Protect Your Neck. I think you know, you think of RZA's best standout is Wu-Tang Clan. He can't nothing to fuck with just because of his voice and him singing the chorus. Like, that's a standout piece. Method Man is just is Method Man. Mad different methods the way I do my shit. Roll it, like it, light it, smoke it. You know, that's Method Man. Yeah, many different styles of how he does his shit. And you know, I think it's so amazing where this has led this group. And this would be the second up. So if I kind of give you now the top 5 albums from this year, and this is hard. So let me go back and consult my list and think about the top 5 albums. I see the list with my own 2 eyes. So I would tell you in no order, but I'll give you the top 2. Yeah, I'll go with it this way. The top 5 albums in this, 21 and Over is 5. 93 Till Infinity is 4. I easily, on a perfect day, I get into that album and I feel it's number 1. Snoop Dogg is number 3, Doggy Style. 36 Chambers is number 2, and Midnight Marauders is number 1. So that is the list. So that is 5 albums that I've just now summarized for you. So let's talk about the albums that I didn't put on the list. Scarface, an incredible project. It didn't gravitate with me. I respect Scarface and all of his guest shots, but for me, he's not one that would be on my top 5 list. The next one that I think about, Heavy D, Blue Funk. There are cuts. Here Comes the Hebster. Blue Funk. Um, those are cuts that I love. There's not enough the interludes, and I know he kind of leads you on a story. You kind of get to know him way better than any of his other albums. Playability, it kind of suffers, and that's why that album is not a really hard one for me to not be on the list. Um, was one Far Side and also 1993 by Naughty by Nature. This was the follow-up album to uh to their first album with OPP on it, and still that came out in like 91. But we think of, again, like it's a hip hop anthem. Hip Hop Hooray um is an incredible song. And again, I think if we think of the first album, and again, like they had some great projects, and I think the original album was just called Naughty by Nature. But 1990, not 1993, I think you think of Feel Me Flow, Take It to Your Face, It's On. Um, those are all great, and It's On. I love it how it's in the basement, and then the beat flies in, and Tresh goes crazy. Um, I think there's some great tracks that are The Hood Comes First, but this is maybe the album that I thought of taking Tupac's spot. I ultimately went with Tupac because as much as those songs are great, I Get Around, personally, I like it better than anything that's on this album. And I know that is hard for some people to hear. It's like, better than Hip Hop Hooray? No, I Get Around is an incredible song, sonically, lyrically, fun play. This was what hip hop was all about at that time. So that is why that album is there. But and then I would say, as I said, number two is oh, sorry, albums that I missed is where I was at. So albums that also just didn't quite make the list. Oh, Onyx, that was their debut album, Back the Fuck Up. And then Black Sunday, I didn't like that album nearly as much as the first Cypress Hill album. So this is why that one didn't make it for me. And then, there's some other good ones there. There was Freestyle Fellowship, very underrated. Black Rain by Queen Latifah, my favorite, Femc, not on the list. Dell, super underrated, No Need for Alarm. And that, again, that was in conjunction with Souls of Mischief. Slaughterhouse, another great album. Still remember the tape. It was dope. Spice One had a good album. Big Daddy Kane looks like a job for. It had a couple cuts, but not enough to say that it was going to be on there. A-Ball and MGG had a good album that was out that year. But yeah, I think that, and then Jazzmatazz again was out that time. But this is the list. This is the list. That's the final remaining album. So to recap, the albums that actually made the list here: Lords of the Underground, Here Come the Lords, Reach In by Diggable Planets, Strictly for My Niggas, Tupac, A Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders, and 36 Chambers, Wu-Tang Clan. So that is the total list. For those that might have missed the early part of the list, if you're just listening to this, as this is the last episode for 2023. And again, I appreciate all the listeners. Shout out to Scarborough Spots. Shout out to all the people from my neighborhood, all those that have supported the podcast over the 3 years that I'm going into now, year 4. But the list, as we roll through. So Alkaholiks 21 and Over was January. Black Moon, Into the Stage, 36 Chambers. Or sorry, Into the Stage, Black Moon was February. Buhloone Mind State by De La Soul was March. Kind of really tied in with De La Soul, actually being the group that finally got their catalog and was able to release it now on streaming platforms. Erick Sermon, No Pressure, heavily underrated. May was Soul to Mischief, arguably the best album in many people's eyes. KRS-One, Return of the Boom Bap, and then Doggy Style by Snoop Dogg. Those were the first 7. Then I layered in, again, as I layered in Lords of the Underground, Diggable Planet's debut album, Tupac's, sophomore Flex, Strictly from My Niggas, and then obviously I wrapped up with Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders, and Wu-Tang's 36 Chambers. So peace, y'all. Thank you for listening. Much appreciated. We'll catch you on the flip side. This is another episode of Sneaks Rhymes of Life. Out.